The lights burned hot on the stage, washing everything in a harsh white glow. A restless crowd of reporters, cameras, and political junkies buzzed in the packed auditorium, waiting for fireworks. They didn't have to wait long. Barron Trump, tall, poised, with that familiar family smirk plastered across his face, leaned into the microphone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words sliced through the air with an arrogance that made the entire room jolt. Jasmine Crockett, he sneered, is unfit to lead. Completely unfit. The audience gasped. Some laughed nervously. Others shook their heads, stunned at the audacity. The cameras clicked like machine guns, trying to capture the exact second this headline-making insult left his lips. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot, sharp, poisonous, impossible to ignore. On stage, Barron didn't blink. He was enjoying it. The confidence, the entitlement, the belief that he could dismiss a sitting congresswoman with a single word. His posture told the story. Arms folded, chin raised, the kind of cocky defiance that said, "Yes, I said it. And I dare you to challenge me." But all eyes weren't on him for long. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't snap back or stumble over a rushed defense. Instead, she let the silence work in her favor. She took a slow breath, adjusted the microphone in front of her, and for a split second, the faintest smile played across her lips. Something was coming. The crowd could feel it, a low hum of tension rising in their chests. A few whispered, "She's about to go off." Others leaned forward, cameras ready, knowing instinctively that history was about to happen. And then, with deliberate calm, Crockett reached down. Her hand brushed the edge of the podium, searching for something. Entire room froze, waiting. Barron's smirk faltered for the briefest moment. Uncertainty flickering across his face, because whatever she was about to pull out, it wasn't part of his script. But Crockett didn't flinch, the narrator intones. Instead, she reached for something that would stop the room cold. What could she possibly reveal that would flip the narrative on its head? The insult could have been brushed aside as another reckless jab in a political season already full of noise. But this moment wasn't just another soundbite, it was something far bigger. The stage wasn't small, and the audience wasn't casual. This was a televised forum, cameras streaming live, headlines forming in real time. Millions of eyes were on Barron Trump as he chose to call Jasmine Crockett unfit. To some, it seemed like the arrogance of youth, the latest echo of a dynasty built on bombast and spectacle. To others, it was the chilling reminder of how easily power and privilege can try to define who is and isn't worthy of leadership in America. Barron Trump wasn't just any figure. He represented the continuation of a brand, a political empire that thrived on confrontation and dominance. Emerging from the long shadow of his father, his words carried more weight than his years might suggest. Each phrase was calculated to signal, "I belong on this stage. I have inherited the mantle." And then there was Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman who had clawed her way up, not through inheritance, but through grit, intellect, and an unshakable commitment to her community. She wasn't polished like the dynasties. She wasn't wrapped in the silk of inherited wealth. She was forged in the fire of hard work and relentless advocacy. When she took the stage, she carried not just herself, but the voices of people too, often dismissed. That's why this clash mattered. It wasn't just Barron versus Crockett. It was entitlement versus earned credibility. It was generational privilege colliding with generational struggle. It was America's oldest question. Who gets to lead and why? The stakes rippled far beyond the room. In living rooms across the country, people leaned forward, watching the exchange not as distant entertainment but as a reflection of their own lives. For every viewer who had ever been told they weren't enough, not polished enough, not connected enough, not wealthy enough, Crockett stood as their proxy. And for every viewer who believed leadership could be inherited like a crown, Barron Trump was their champion. The tension wasn't only about personalities. It was about the future of politics itself, Would America continue down a path where last names and dynasties determined influence? Or would voices like Crockett's, forged from struggle and service, redefine what it means to be fit to lead? The crowd inside the auditorium seemed to sense it too. Every camera lens, every microphone, every pair of eyes locked in, knowing. Instinctively, they were witnessing something larger than a single insult. A political torch was being contested, and sparks were already flying, and yet, for all the drama of the moment, the true turning point had not yet arrived. Barron's words were only the opening move, the initial strike in a battle that would test not just Crockett's composure, but her very ability to command the stage against a towering name. The air was heavy with suspense. Some supporters of Barron snickered, convinced that the insult had landed its blow. Others glanced at Crockett with anticipation, waiting to see if she would fold under the weight of his words. Asterisk, calm, deliberate, purposeful. And in that instant, the audience knew something was coming. Something that no one, not even Barron Trump himself, could have predicted, because the insult was only the spark. What came next? Nobody could have scripted to understand the sting behind Barron Trump's words. You have to step back and look at the world that shaped him. He was born not into struggle, but into spectacle. Gold-plated halls, private jets, and a family name that carried both controversy and influence. From the moment he could walk, he wasn't just a child, he was a brand. Every camera that turned his way, every headline that mentioned his name, was part of a dynasty carefully cultivated for power. In that dynasty, politics wasn't a calling, it was an inheritance. Leadership wasn't earned through sweat or sacrifice. It was passed down like a prized estate, along with the assumption that the Trump children would step onto the stage already entitled to command. Barron Trump's emergence as a political voice carried with it the same aura of inevitability. Didn't have to fight for the microphone. He didn't have to claw for recognition. The cameras found him because of his name, and when he spoke, his words were amplified through the echo chamber of a family legacy that had dominated American politics for years. But with that inheritance came a peculiar contradiction. He spoke often of others being unfit to inexperienced, too unqualified, too ordinary, while never having faced the trials that forge true leaders. He dismissed the struggles of people who had built their lives brick by brick, even as his own life had been constructed for him, brick by golden brick, long before he stepped into the arena, and on that stage, his body language told the story. As much as his words, carried himself with the kind of effortless confidence only possible when one has never been forced to prove themselves. Shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of superiority and amusement. He didn't just call Jasmine Crockett unfit. He believed he had the authority to define the word. The crowd fed his confidence. Every chuckle from his supporters, every nod of agreement from loyalists in the audience, seemed to embolden him further. It was the look of someone who believed the room, and perhaps the nation, would always bend in his favor. Hadn't it always been that way? Yet behind that smirk lay the fatal flaw of so many who mistake privilege for power, overconfidence. He underestimated the weight of his words. He underestimated the woman standing across from him. And, perhaps most dangerously, he underestimated how quickly the tide of a room can turn when truth steps into the spotlight, because arrogance has a way of blinding its holder. It shields them from recognizing when their enemy isn't rattled, when their audience isn't entirely convinced, when their own certainty is planting the seeds of their undoing. Barron Trump didn't see it. Not yet. In his mind, he was untouchable. A Trump on a stage with a crowd at his feet was a story he'd lived his whole life. He thought this would be no different, but the silence that followed his insult, that silence he mistook for victory, was something else entirely. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't intimidation. It was anticipation. The people weren't waiting for him to deliver the knockout blow. They were waiting to see how Jasmine Crockett would respond. And that small, crucial detail, that shift in attention he didn't notice, would prove devastating. For while he basked in the glow of his own words, Crockett was already moving with a quiet, deliberate confidence of her own. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't cornered. She was prepared. And in that preparation, lay the seed of his downfall, because the same arrogance that gave him confidence would blindside him in the moments ahead. If Barron Trump's story was one of inheritance, Jasmine Crockett's story was one of grit. Long before she ever stepped under the hot lights of a national stage, she was the daughter of perseverance. Her family didn't hand her a golden path. They handed her the values of work, sacrifice, and resilience. She grew up seeing what it meant to struggle and still push forward, what it meant to fight for dignity even when the odds tilted heavily against you. Those lessons never left her. But then, she moved. When she chose the law, it wasn't for prestige or to decorate her resume. It was because she understood how the system could be weaponized against ordinary people. She wanted to stand where others were voiceless. She wanted to carry the weight of those who couldn't afford the kind of justice that came easily to the powerful. Courtrooms became her proving ground. They weren't glamorous. They weren't forgiving. Late nights surrounded by law books, exhaustion gnawing at her as she prepared case after case. Those were her reality. Every win was hard-earned. Every setback carved a deeper resolve. She didn't have a dynasty to fall back on, only the relentless belief that truth mattered, and that someone had to defend it. Her opponents in those courtrooms were often better. Funded, more connected, armed with every advantage money could buy. But what Crockett carried was something money couldn't manufacture: conviction. She fought for clients whose names would never make headlines, mothers struggling to keep their children, workers fighting against exploitation, families silenced by injustice. Every battle, no matter how small, was practice for moments exactly like this one. She built a reputation not for being the loudest, but for being unflinching. In depositions, in hearings, in cross-examinations, she refused to be intimidated. That refusal earned her respect, but also enemies. People who thrived on dismissing women like her, voices like hers, underestimated her again and again. And each time, she proved them wrong. When Crockett made the leap into public service, she carried those courtroom scars with her like armor. In the halls of Congress, the dynamics were eerily familiar. Wealth and influence tried to dictate the rules just as they had in the courts. Loud voices tried to drown her out. But once again, she refused to be silenced. To her supporters, Crockett became more than just a representative. She was a fighter not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they were less than. She was fiery, unapologetic, and relentless in defending her community, where others might bend for political convenience. She planted her feet and stood firm, and that's why this clash with Barron Trump cut so deep. His insult wasn't simply aimed at her, it was aimed at everyone she represented. When he called her unfit, he wasn't just dismissing Jasmine Crockett, he was dismissing every woman told she wasn't qualified enough. Every black professional questioned about their legitimacy. Every working-class American made to feel like their voices didn't matter in rooms of power. That's the weight Crockett carried with her on that stage. It wasn't just about defending herself. It was about proving that dignity and service mattered more than entitlement and name recognition, and she was. Because for years, she had been underestimated. For years, she had stood in rooms where people assumed she would fold. For years, she had sharpened herself on the whetstone of adversity. And in every one of those moments, she learned how to turn doubt into strength. The courtroom taught her to prepare for every angle. Politics taught her to expect every attack. Life taught her that silence, patience, and timing could be more devastating than shouting back. So when Barron Trump stood tall, smirking, and tried to belittle her with a single word, unfit, he was walking into a trap he didn't even see. Because Jasmine Crockett was not the type to stumble when insulted. She was the type to wait, to bide her time, to gather her composure until the precise moment arrived, to deliver a response that could shatter arrogance at its core. And in that moment, on that stage, facing the weight of dynasty and privilege, she was more than just a congresswoman defending her name. She was every dismissed, underestimated voice rolled into one. Which is why, when Barron tried to belittle her, she was ready with a truth bomb years in the making. The air inside the Auditorium was already thick with tension, but Barron Trump wasn't finished. His first insult had landed with shock, and now he wanted to double down. He leaned into the microphone again, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed, laced with the confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged. "She doesn't have the experience," he declared, waving a dismissive hand toward Crockett, as if brushing her existence aside. "She doesn't have the respect of her peers. Honestly, folks, Jasmine Crockett is a joke." The crowd stirred, some clapping, others jeering, the clash of reactions filling the room with a restless hum. The reporters in the front rows scribbled furiously, their eyes darting back and forth between the two figures on stage. Sensing that this exchange was about to boil over, Barron wasn't done. He pressed harder, circling his attacks around her credibility like a hawk. "She talks big," he sneered, "but leadership isn't about shouting, it's about results. What has she ever actually done?" The arrogance was thick in his tone, his words designed not only to wound but to humiliate. The smirk on his face told the story. He believed he had her cornered. She would crack under the pressure of his relentless jabs. But Jasmine Crockett didn't crack. She stood tall, her expression calm, her voice steady when she finally leaned into her own microphone. She didn't rush. She didn't match his volume. Instead, she let the weight of her silence command the moment, forcing the crowd to lean in closer, straining to hear her words. "Mr. Trump," she began her tone even, almost conversational, "I've been underestimated my entire life. And I've learned that when people don't know your story, they mistake strength for weakness." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried firm, deliberate, resonant. The crowd fell quieter, their murmurs fading into stillness as they sensed something shifting. Barron's smirk faltered for just a second, irritation flickering across his face as he realized she wasn't playing his game. The rhythm of the debate changed. Every time Barron threw another insult, Crockett refused to swing back with anger. Instead, she answered with poise, dismantling his points not with volume, but with precision. Where he mocked, she clarified. Where he exaggerated, she countered with facts. Where he tried to provoke, she disarmed with calm authority. It wasn't the fiery clash he had expected. It was something far more dangerous to his position: composure. The audience felt the energy shifting. The laughter that had followed Barron's opening barbs now gave way to uneasy murmurs. Heads turned toward Crockett, their skepticism melting into respect as they watched her absorb each jab without losing her ground. The camera zoomed in, capturing the tightening of Barron's jaw, the restless tapping of his fingers on the podium. The arrogance that had fueled him minutes earlier now threatened to expose him. For the first time, he wasn't in full control of the room. Crockett's restraint became its own form of power. Let Barron expend himself. Let him reveal his immaturity in contrast to her discipline. And then, just when it seemed the crowd had settled into this back and forth, just when everyone assumed the night would remain a battle of words, she shifted. Her hand moved again, slow and deliberate, to the side of the podium. She didn't raise her voice, didn't signal what was about to happen. But the movement was enough to make the crowd stir. Sensing something imminent, Barron's eyes narrowed, a trace of unease replacing his earlier cockiness. The cameras caught the flicker of doubt, the realization that maybe, just maybe, he had underestimated her. Asterisk, and then the narrator intones. Just when the room thought she would fold, Jasmine Crockett reached for the weapon no one saw coming. The tension in the room had reached its breaking point. Barron Trump leaned forward on his podium, clearly confident that he had landed his blows. His jabs echoed in the crowd's ears. Unfit, joke, unqualified. He wore the smug grin of someone convinced the match was already over. And then Jasmine Crockett moved. It was subtle at first, just her hand, reaching toward the side of her podium. But that small, deliberate motion carried the gravity of a drum roll. The murmurs began again, whispers darting through the audience like sparks searching for dry wood. What was she doing? Crockett lifted a slim device into view. A recorder. Black, unassuming, almost invisible against the stage lights. But in that moment, it gleamed like a weapon. The room collectively inhaled. Sirens. Smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. He hadn't planned for this. Hadn't expected props, proof, evidence. Had expected a war of words, not receipts. Crockett placed the recorder on the podium, her fingers steady. She looked out over the audience, then back at Barron. Her expression calm, but resolute. And then she pressed play. At first, only a faint crackle of static filled the air. The crowd leaned forward, straining to catch what was coming. Barron shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting toward the speakers as though he could will the sound away. Then the voices began. Muffled at first, then clearer. It was unmistakably Barron's voice caught in a private moment. A conversation not meant for public ears. Of course she's qualified. The recording revealed Barron's own words dripping with casual contradiction. But qualified doesn't matter. Its optics do. If I make her look weak, people will believe it. The room exploded in gasps. Some covered their mouths, others turned toward one another in disbelief. Reporters froze mid-scribble, their pens hanging uselessly in the air. Cameramen zoomed in, desperate to capture every flicker of emotion across Barron's face as his carefully constructed attack unraveled in real time. The words played again. Echoing through the chamber like a confession, she's qualified. But optics do. It wasn't just hypocrisy. It was strategy, arrogance weaponized. He hadn't believed his own insult. He had calculated it, hoping that sheer force of repetition could turn a lie into truth. On stage, Barron paled. The cocky posture evaporated, his fingers tapped nervously on the podium, his lips pressed into a thin line, as though he might still find some escape. His own voice was condemning him in front of the very crowd he had tried to impress, and then came the applause. It started small, a few scattered claps from the back rows. But quickly it swelled, spreading like a tidal wave through the room. Cheers! Rose mingling with shouts of affirmation. That's right. Exposed. The energy flipped. The same audience that had laughed moments earlier at Barron's insult was now rallying behind. Crockett? But Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't dance in her victory or throw his words back in his face. She let the recording end, aloud. The silence to linger, and then calmly addressed the crowd. Leadership, she said, her voice steady, isn't about tearing others down with lies. It's about telling the truth, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. Her tone was measured, almost gentle, but the impact was seismic. The audience erupted again, not with outrage this time, but with vindication. They weren't just watching a debate, they were watching arrogance. Collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. Crockett glanced once more at Barron, but she didn't gloat. She didn't need to. His silence was victory enough. His shifting posture, his downward gaze, his sudden inability to smirk, it all told the story. The cameras captured every second. The once confident heir to a dynasty stood stripped bare. Undone not by shouting or insults, but by his own words. And the beauty of it all was in the restraint. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't descend into the mud. She simply let the truth speak louder than any insult ever could. In living rooms across the country, viewers leaned forward, goosebumps rising on their arms. Social media feeds lit up. Instantly, hashtags forming in real time. Hashtag receipts, hashtag unfit exposed, hashtag Crockett clapback. Clips of Barron's face at the moment of realization spread like wildfire. Memes, GIFs, and commentary would soon flood every corner of the internet, because this wasn't just a debate moment. It was a cultural moment. A turning point. Proof that arrogance, no matter how polished, could crumble when confronted with receipts. Barron Trump, who had strutted onto that stage with the weight of a dynasty behind him, was suddenly just another figure exposed by the truth. And Jasmine Crockett, the woman he had dismissed as unfit, had just proven herself more than capable of standing tall in the harshest spotlight. The room was still buzzing. When Crockett leaned into her microphone one last time, words are easy, she said, her eyes sweeping the audience. Integrity is hard. And tonight, integrity spoke for itself. The applause that followed was thunderous, shaking the walls. Barron looked smaller now, diminished, his figure overshadowed by the roar of a crowd that no longer belonged to him. The debate moderator, struggled to regain control, his voice nearly drowned out by the chants of Crockett supporters. But it didn't matter. The moment had already cemented itself in the public imagination. Because sometimes, history turns not on wars or elections, but on the simple act of one person refusing to be diminished and having the proof to back it up, and yet as powerful. As that moment was, it was only the beginning. Because what Jasmine Crockett unleashed on that stage would not stay in that room, would ripple outward, through headlines, through social media, through the halls of power themselves. But the ripple effects of that recording would spread far beyond that room. The moment Jasmine Crockett pressed play, the country changed course. What happened on that stage didn't stay confined to the four walls of the auditorium. It erupted outward. Faster than any campaign strategist could have planned, faster than Barron Trump could ever have contained. Within minutes, the clip was online. A shaky cell phone recording from the audience hit Twitter first. Then, the official broadcast feed dropped on YouTube, sliced into bite-sized edits by late-night users who knew a viral gem when they saw one. The hashtags were instant. Hashtag unfit, exposed. Hashtag receipts, hashtag mic drop Crockett. On TikTok, creators set the clip. Of Barron's stunned face to dramatic music, some looping it in slow motion, others cutting it right at the moment his smirk dissolved. Instagram was flooded with memes, Crockett's.com stare photoshopped onto movie posters, side-by-side comparisons of her composure versus his collapse. By the next morning, the numbers told the story. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of comments. The internet had chosen its side, and it wasn't subtle. This is leadership. She didn't yell. She didn't rant. She just let the receipts speak. Barron thought he was untouchable. Guess what? Not anymore. Even critics of Crockett's politics were forced into an awkward silence. The usual talking heads who might have rushed to defend, Barron hesitated. How do you spin a recording where his own words betrayed him? Silence was deafening. Meanwhile, her supporters roared. Grassroots donors opened their wallets. Volunteers signed up in record numbers. Crockett's name trended for days, not as the target of insult, but as the architect of a takedown that would be replayed for years to come. And then came the commentators. Asterisk Cable News ran the clip on a loop. Dissecting it frame by frame like a sporting highlight. Here, one analyst pointed out, is the exact second Barron realizes the recording is his own voice. Another replayed the crowd's eruption, slowing it down to emphasize the wave of applause. Late-night comedians had a field day. Monologues wrote themselves. Barron called her unfit. Then she pulled out the fit check. The jokes spread. But underneath the laughter was a deeper recognition. Something significant had shifted. For Crockett, the impact was more than viral fame. Her credibility skyrocketed. She had not only defended herself, she had reframed the entire narrative. Instead of being remembered as the congresswoman called unfit, she became the congresswoman who turned the insult inside out and left her opponent speechless. It was political judo at its finest. Asterisk Barron. Nato, on the other hand, vanished from the spotlight. His team issued no immediate statements. His allies offered no full-throated defenses. For once, the Trump name, usually quick to spin controversy into fuel, fell quiet. The silence spoke louder than any rebuttal could. The nation was left with the image of a young man undone by his own words and a congresswoman who stood taller for it. It played out like a cinematic montage across the media. Landscape. A New York Times headline. Crockett flips the script. Washington Post op-ed. The power of receipts in politics. A viral tweet with 200,000 likes. She didn't clap back. She cashed the check. Everywhere you turned, the story replayed in a dozen different ways. On subway trains, commuters watched the clip on their phones. In classrooms, students debated the moment like it was history in the making. Families at dinner tables laughed at the memes, then paused to talk about what it meant. Because this wasn't just a viral moment. It was a mirror. A mirror reflecting entitlement on one side and resilience on the other. A mirror that forced America to ask, who do we want leading us into the future? The celebrations were loud, the memes hilarious, the applause thunderous. But beneath the noise, something deeper stirred. Because amid the laughter and celebration, one message rose above the noise, reminding everyone why this moment mattered. When the roar of the crowd finally settled, Jasmine Crockett stood steady. At the podium, she didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. The power of the moment wasn't in humiliating Barron Trump. It was in reclaiming something bigger than either of them. Because what Barron had hurled at her, the word unfit, wasn't new. It was the echo of every dismissal ever, thrown at those who dared to rise beyond the limits others placed on them. She spoke slowly, carefully, making sure every ear in the room caught her words. When someone calls you unfit, they're not just insulting you. They're insulting everyone who looks like you, comes from where you come from, fights for what you fight for. The audience leaned in, silent now, because they knew she was no longer just talking to Barron. She was talking to America, and she continued, "But let me tell you something. Fitness isn't measured by your last name, your wealth, or your connections. Fitness is measured by the battles you fight when no one's watching, by the people you choose to stand up for, when it costs you something, by the truth you carry, even when lies are easier." In that instant, Crockett transformed the confrontation. It wasn't about sparring with the son of a dynasty. It was about showing every underestimated worker, every silenced woman, every dismissed immigrant, every child told they'd never measure up, that their worth was not defined by the arrogance of the privileged. The crowd erupted again, but this time it wasn't applause for the takedown. It was applause for the truth. A truth too many had waited too long to hear. On television screens across the nation, the words rippled outward. They were clipped, quoted, replayed, and stitched into highlight reels, not just as a political moment, but as a cultural statement. Commentators framed it as more than a clapback. This was something deeper. A defense of democracy itself, where the measure of a leader is not bloodline or entitlement, but service, resilience, and truth. And in living rooms, classrooms, and coffee shops, ordinary people found themselves nodding, some with tears in their eyes, because the speech spoke to them. It carried the weight of their own experiences. The times they too were called unfit. The moments they too had to prove their dignity in the face of arrogance. Jasmine Crockett's voice became a vessel for theirs. She closed with words that felt less like rhetoric and more like a promise. America is not about privilege passed down like an inheritance. America is about perseverance, the courage to rise, to stand, to keep pushing forward when others try to push you down. Her words struck like a chord, resonating in places politics rarely reaches the human heart. And as the clip continued to spread, the contrast crystallized. Barron's smirk had embodied entitlement, the assumption that power is inherited. Crockett's calm strength embodied perseverance, the truth that power is earned. It wasn't just a debate. It wasn't just a viral moment. A reminder of the America that still believed in equality, resilience, and the idea that no one is unfit simply because the powerful say so. The crowd rose to their feet, not in outrage, not in spectacle, but in respect. And in that instant, America saw the difference between privilege and perseverance. And so, what began as an insult, a smirk, a word meant to belittle, became something far greater. Barron Trump's attempt to brand Jasmine Crockett as unfit didn't weaken her. It ignited her. In that charged moment, she flipped the narrative on its head and turned dismissal into dignity, arrogance into truth, privilege into perseverance. The title of this story said it all. Barron Trump calls Jasmine Crockett UNFIT, and she played a recording that changed everything. And everything did change. Because Crockett showed the nation that being fit to serve isn't about the family you come from. It's the money in your pocket or the name on your birth certificate. It's about courage in the face of arrogance. It's about truth in the face of entitlement. It's about service to people, not service to ego. And that's why this moment matters far beyond politics. It speaks to anyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they weren't enough. Crockett's stand was a reminder that voices of perseverance can and will silence. The sneers of privilege. Now, here's where you come in. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why truth still matters, don't let it stop here. Subscribe, share this video. Add your voice to the chorus of those who refuse to be silenced.
Ow!
Because stories like this deserve to spread, not just as entertainment, but as inspiration. Because the next time arrogance steps onto the stage, it may just meet its match again.